Hey there, folks. Welcome to yesterday's news for September 5th, 2018. There was nothing in the news today that I felt like talking about, so I'm going to talk about a video that I watched on YouTube. It's pretty old. I don't know how old it is, but it's been out there for a while. It's linked in the description below. It is a sort of debate between Jordan Peterson and a couple of objectivists. Yarnbrook I was already familiar with, and a guy named Greg Salmieri. I'm not as familiar with him. He was interesting, but I didn't know him before watching that video. And so, the discussion was pretty predictable. If you're familiar with Objectivism, you're familiar with Jordan Peterson, it's kind of like, okay, well, that's the conversation that's going to happen. It wasn't particularly revelatory in any way. It was, I don't know. I'm not necessarily qualified to summarize Peterson's philosophy. Certainly not in the time frame that I try to keep my videos to. But it's sort of like, one of the things that I admire about Peterson is that he's bridging the gap between sort of the materialist philosophy and immaterialist philosophy, this spiritual philosophy. And in a way that I've always struggled to kind of integrate those ideas. And it's interesting to watch him debate the naturalists, in this case objectivists, but he's also talked to our naturalists, materialists. So also had debates with Sam Harris, which I will eventually watch, but Sam Harris tends to bore me. Again, it's one of those. I mean, Yarnbrook is the same way. It's like I've read Ayn Rand's work. I know what she's saying. I understand that philosophy, and I know what you're going to say. And I know where you missed the point, and I know where you have something challenging and interesting. But so I end up getting bored with it, and I don't like to listen to things that bore me. But what I find interesting in as Peterson confronts the materialist philosophers, that they're not used to being challenged in that way, because the difference between someone like, your typical Christian apologist, John Lennox, somebody like that, and a Sam Harris, are the difference is at fundamental assumptions, and it's very hard to bridge that gap. But Peterson has a knack for having this sort of evolutionary view of spirituality that allows more of that dialogue to happen, instead of it just being like, you need to believe that there's more to the world than physical reality, and what's wrong with you? There's only physical reality. Those two arguments, that's never really going to go anywhere. But Peterson comes along with, well, maybe physical reality is a little more weird than we thought, and at the same time, maybe physical reality isn't really what we're talking about. And that's very interesting. So, what ends up happening is, with one of the things I really like about Peterson, and that he's successfully integrated that space that I've been trying to integrate myself for most of my life, is that it's like he ends up wrestling with questions that the person he's debating doesn't know exist. you know, so in this case, it's he's wrestling with questions of what does consciousness mean? What does where does being come from, and the objectivist is what it's there. It's that we all know that this is a thing, this is a post-it note with a needle through it, but it also acts as a wind turbine. Yeah. Anyways, and so in the one exchange in this video, Peterson is talking about how do you know that a tree stump and a beanbag are both chairs, and it's like the meaning of things is integrally entwined with consciousness and all that, and it very much opens the door intellectually to a spiritual view, and without actually being a spiritual view, which is very powerful in my opinion. And again, it's like he's wrestling with this question of how do you know that a stump and a beanbag are both chairs, and the objectivist answer is, well, because they're chairs. And I found that interesting, and it's also it makes a good. The same thing happens on the other side, is that I find a lot of Christian apologists not taking evolution seriously enough, and not taking some of those sort of border issues seriously enough. We have a tendency, particularly in Western Protestant American Christianity, of well, here's this book and it says this stuff and that's true and that's just what it is. And it's it's like, well, what does true mean? Pontius Pilate wasn't just being snarky. Defining truth is a hard thing to do, and understand what is it exactly that you're looking for in truth. And so, and again, Peterson challenges us on the other side of that as well. And I've had to for me it's been fantastic, because I kind of always knew that, but wrestled with how to articulate it. And I have found that it has, chasing those intellectual rabbits with Peterson has actually strengthened my faith in God, and things like, actually, I'd never really taken evolutionary theory seriously. Because it was always this contentious thing growing up in a Christian environment, and just like, I have no use for it, and but then when I actually started taking it seriously, and like, what does this actually mean? And that's ended up actually strengthening my faith, because instead of seeing it as this excuse to not believe in God, which it's not, because it doesn't answer the fundamental questions of where did this system come from. What I found, to me, it actually just reveals that God was that much more brilliant in the way he designed the universe, rather than challenging the necessity of a designer, because he built a self-designing system. That's pretty impressive. It's kind of like you have these adaptive algorithms in the world that Facebook uses them, YouTube uses them, and everything. And it's basically it's a program. It's a self-writing program, basically. It's a self-writing computer program. And it's like, the people who look at evolution and say, here's proof that there is no God. It's kind of like looking at an adaptive algorithm and saying, look, there's there's no such thing as programmers. When it's like you're missing the very, very obvious question: who built the freaking computer? And I find that actually understanding by abandoning religious presuppositions, I am able to ask harder questions about the universe and know the universe better, and therefore know God better. Because instead of tying myself up into established interpretations of what these traditional stories mean, I can integrate that with, now we've discovered a whole nother book. It's been described as the book of God's works, and it's like, if I can come to terms with that, I can instead of being challenged by new knowledge and afraid of new knowledge, this actually ties me in deeper to God. This evolutionary theory ties me in deeper to God. It doesn't make me question it more, because it's not an excuse to not believe in God. It's proof of how much more sophisticated the system is. And so, yeah, that kind of rambled and went in weird directions, but it's almost midnight and I'm tired, and so I'm going to leave it with that. I hope you enjoyed my rambling tonight. If you found it interesting, like, share, and subscribe. If not, ignore me, and I will see you next time.